Oh yeah, lemon juice. Can apple cider vinegar help you digest protein more after meals? Can iron combat spring fatigue? Health benefits of iron. 어, 사약이 왜 이렇게 많냐? 아, 나 진짜. 음. Foods high in vitamin C. (13만원) 써야 되네. 잠깐만. 17만원, 12만원, 14만원, 12만원, 아, 12만원을 써야 돼. Health benefits of iron.
Health benefits. The most dangerous sign of an iron deficiency is not pale skin, it's not fatigue, and it's not vertical ridges on your nails. Iron is needed to transport oxygen to your brain, not just your muscles. When you're low on iron, you will feel it where you need it the most. It's easy to fix an iron deficiency with some red meat in your diet, but most of the time it's not an actual deficiency of iron, it's a deficiency in copper, the trace mineral that makes iron available to you in your blood. The most dangerous sign of an iron deficiency is a decrease in your cognitive function, brain fog, loss of concentration, loss of memory, and even early dementia. The most dangerous sign of there's a very important relationship between iron and your hair, your nails, and your skin. Now, the very interesting thing about this trace mineral in that we have no internal mechanism to regulate the elimination of iron. So just as a deficiency of iron could be very, very devastating, an excess of iron could be very, very devastating. But our body does have certain mechanisms depriving microbes of pathogens, because almost all pathogens need iron to survive. And so there is this huge competition of iron between our pathogens and our own cells. But that's going to be for a separate video. Today we're going to talk about the effects of iron on our hair, nails, and skin. And so many people are deficient in iron. I would say worldwide it's about 1 billion people. Yet when you're diagnosed with an iron deficiency, you're told to take elemental iron. Elemental iron is not the best form of iron for absorption. And so many times when you take it, you're waiting for these symptoms to clear up, but it never does. And then you ask your doctor, well, what's the root cause? Why am I iron deficient? And they might say, well, you're just anemic. All right, then why do I have anemia in the first place? So I'm going to cover that, but let's first talk about how iron affects your hair, nails, and skin. All right, as far as the skin goes, when you're deficient in iron, it has huge consequences. Number one, it creates a type of skin called sallow skin, which is a pale, slightly yellowish, kind of a dull complexion. You're basically going to lose that bright complexion, and now you'll have this uneven skin tone that you'll see little blemishes, you'll see sometimes little red dots, but overall, a lack of iron really affects your overall complexion on your face. Now, as far as your nails go, you may find that your nails are brittle, and if you're chronically deficient in iron, you're going to get that little spooning of the nail. It's going to look a little bit like the nail is scooped out. So brittle nails and a spoon-shaped nail. All right, what about the hair? Well, the hair is going to lose its texture. It's going to become brittle, kind of tough, and you'll see pattern hair loss. Now, in men, that is a loss of hair on the top of the head. In females, pattern hair loss is basically thinning of the hair all over. And so a lack of iron is one big cause of that. And females are more deficient in iron than men because they have their menstrual periods every month and they lose a lot of blood. And because iron is part of hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is part of blood, when you lose blood, you lose iron. Iron is needed for oxygen. And so if you're not able to have enough oxygen to your hair, your nails, or your skin, all sorts of things can happen. So how do you become deficient in iron? Well, one is you're not taking enough iron in through the diet. Now, the problem with iron in diet is that there's two forms of iron. You have heme iron and non-heme iron. And this relates to the efficiency of how iron is absorbed in your body. When you consume iron from things like spinach or beans, the absorption is much, much less. Like spinach has an absorption rate of like 1.5, beans are like 2.2, but then when we get to like beef liver, the absorption is like 15. Then when we get to red meat, we're talking about an absorption rate of 21. So if we compare the non-heme source roughly at a 2 and a heme source with red meat at a 21, you can see there's a vast difference. So consuming animal meat is going to give you a lot more iron. And I highly recommend you get your iron from food versus a supplement, because the elemental iron that they give you in supplements is just, it's crap. It's low quality. It's not the type of iron that nature is providing you. Now, if you absolutely cannot eat red meat for some reason, then I would recommend getting it from maybe a supplement that's a dehydrated beef liver or even a spleen extract from an animal. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is your stomach. If your stomach does not have enough hydrochloric acid, okay, this is very common, you're not going to absorb iron because the acid in the stomach makes the iron soluble to be absorbed. So if someone doesn't have enough acid, or they're taking antacids because they have heartburn or whatever, or GERD, that could be the reason why they're not absorbing iron. And the interesting thing about not having enough hydrochloric acid to absorb iron is you're probably not going to have enough hydrochloric acid to digest red meat either. And I will get to a solution for that, but you just need to know that a lack of stomach acid can create anemia. Now, another common cause is that your colon or your small intestine is inflamed, okay? Any type of inflammatory gut issue will block the absorption of iron, as in IBS, Crohn's, diverticulitis, irritable bowel syndrome, etc., etc. So inflammation can definitely be a problem. And so the number one cause of inflammation in the gut is there certain foods you're eating. Number one, grains, omega-6 fatty acids in grains, or like things like soy oil or corn oil or canola oil or cottonseed oil, which is in pretty much all the foods, especially if you go out to dinner and you eat something fried. You're going to have a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, and that's going to create inflammation in your gut. And some people are sensitive to nuts and seeds and chocolate, and sometimes even coffee beans, and those things can create inflammation as well. So if a person is eating a lot of peanut butter, for example, and they feel a lot of bloating or stomach pain, that could be an indication that you have inflammation in your gut. All right, the other thing that can block iron is something called phytic acid, which is in grains, beans, legumes. So if you consume a lot of cereal, for example, that could be the reason why you're not absorbing iron, because of all this phytic acid. If you germinate nuts, like let's say you soak them overnight and then you dehydrate them, that will get rid of a lot of the phytic acid. Or if you sprout the seed, you get rid of the phytic acid. Also, too much bran, the fiber in grains, can block iron, as well as too much copper. If you're taking a lot of copper, that can block iron. And also if you have lead in your body, that can block iron. All right, and the next one is blood loss. So menstruation is a common cause of blood loss. If you have an ulcer, that could be a cause. Or if there's any other type of bleeding inside your gut, that could be a cause of a loss of iron. Like let's say you had cancer, for example, in your colon, you're bleeding, and you're wondering why your stool is dark red, well, that could be the reason. If you had gastric bypass, okay, that could be the reason why you're not absorbing iron. And the last reason is alcohol, okay? If you drink alcohol on a regular basis, that could be the reason why you are deficient in iron. All right, so here are things you need to do. Number one, start consuming red meat if you can, okay? Now, number two, this is going to handle the pH problem with the stomach. You need to start taking something called betaine hydrochloride. That's going to acidify the stomach, and that's going to allow you to digest the red meat, okay? And it's going to help you absorb iron. So more animal meats and betaine hydrochloride to acidify the stomach. And I would also recommend, if you're going to take betaine hydrochloride, to take 5 to 6, maybe even 7 before a meal, because I found you have to take a little bit more of it to really have it work. It will take a period of weeks, maybe even months, to fully correct. All right, next thing is to stop eating the foods that are blocking iron. Foods that have phytic acid, like the grains, the nuts, the seeds. Those can be a problem. And stop eating things that are creating inflammation that's blocking your gut. And that would be the grains primarily, and things that are high in omega-6 fatty acids. And I think the best video for you to watch next would be to get more information on that topic. So I put it up right here. Check it out. Anemia can be a big problem and more common than most people realize. So today we're going to talk about the basics and explain them so you know what to look for. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg with Wellness for Life, and if you like to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. Everyone's heard of anemia, but it's not so clear. I remember even back in school, it took me a while before I really understand the wide implications it can have, and here's why. Because anemia has to do with blood, and blood has to do with oxygen delivery. And why do we have oxygen delivery? Well, we breathe so that we can make energy and supply oxygen for all the cells in the body. And if you have anemia, that means you're breathing, you're taking in the oxygen, but you don't have a proper delivery system. Your delivery system is broken or weak or exhausted. So anemia is enormously important. If you have anemia, if your oxygen delivery capacity goes down by 30%, then every cell in your body gets 30% less fuel than it should. So you can see how far-reaching that could be. So the signs and symptoms are things like fatigue, pallor, which means you pale skin, you look pale or whitish, decreased concentration because you don't have the energy to think properly, weakness because you don't have the energy for muscle contraction, dizziness because you don't have the energy for the brain to proper signals properly. So, and the list could be endless pretty much because it can affect everything. How do we measure this? We're just going to talk about the very, very basics, so when you get the test, you know what to look for, and if your test doesn't include these, then you know to ask for them. Red blood cells. This is simply a count of how many red blood cells you have per milliliter of blood. And the number of red blood cells in your body is enormous. As a matter of fact, 70% of all the cells in your body are red blood cells. Somewhere between 20 to 30 trillion cells out of about 40 trillion are red blood cells. And if you look at it from the top, it looks like a circle, but if you look at it from the side, it's what's called a biconcave disc. It's thinner in the middle, so it folds easy. Because these things are, because when these things get out into the very finest of blood vessels called capillaries, then sometimes it's so tight to get through that they have to fold themselves in order to make it through. So the shape is enormously important, and we're going to talk about later how if the shape is abnormal, then they don't function and they get eliminated. The MCV stands, the V stands for volume, that's all you need to know. It's the size of the cell, because a large cell can hold more hemoglobin. It can have a larger oxygen carrying capacity than a smaller cell. And oftentimes, if your body can't make the right too small, then it compensates by making more of them, a larger number. So you have to compare these things a little bit. Hematocrit is the number multiplied by the volume. So the hematocrit is the total percentage of your blood volume that is red blood cells. If we pack them all together, then there should be about 40 to 45% of the blood should be cells by volume. And hemoglobin is the oxygen carrying compound. It's a protein that is part iron. It has a component of iron that can bind to oxygen and carry it out into the tissues. So obviously, if you have more hemoglobin, you have more oxygen carrying capacity. If you don't have enough hemoglobin, you can't carry that oxygen properly. So your oxygen carrying capacity, what determines if you have anemia or not, depends on the total number, their size, and how much hemoglobin they have in them. So any one of these that is decreased could mean that you have anemia. So if we look at some of these numbers, then for a male, men have a little bit more of all these than women. So the normal range for men should be 4.1 to 5.6. And if you notice, that's a pretty large range. It's like almost a 30% difference from the upper to the lower number. So we really want to understand that there's a sweet spot here. And typically, you want, as a man, you want to be somewhere around 4.7, give or take a couple of tenths. But by the time you get to 4.1, you're already borderline anemic. Same thing for women. The range is 3.8 to 5.1, a little bit less, but the sweet spot is about 4.3. The size is important also, and here normally we have a huge range from 80 to 98, but in functional medicine, when they look at optimal value, then they have narrowed it down pretty precisely that the ideal size is pretty close to 90, give or take a couple of points. So by the time it's down to 85, it's already too small, indicating that the body doesn't have enough iron to build these things properly. Hematocrit, again, is the total volume of cells, and the range is 36 to 50. In men, the sweet spot somewhere around 45, give or take a couple. For women, the sweet spot is 40, give or take a couple. Hemoglobin, for men, it's 12.5 to 17. Again, that's a pretty large range. We want to be close to the middle of that range, and the sweet spot for men is about 14 and a half, and for women, 14. There's a lot of women out there who are in the 11.8 or 12 something range that have already lost about 20% of the hemoglobin, so they're borderline anemic, and yet on the blood tests they're in the range, so nobody really gives them any information on that. Nobody raises any flags on that. When people think anemia, the classic standard solution is iron. And it's not quite that simple, because even though an iron deficiency anemia means that all of these will be decreased, that in the absence of iron, the body can't keep up with the as raw material. But only 1% of that is in the serum, and 30% is in the ferritin. So if you really want to look for if you need iron, you don't want to look just at the serum, you want to look at the ferritin. And then we want to understand that even though iron is important, there are many other factors that are maybe even more common in today's society, because very few people are deficient in iron actually. They might be losing iron for various different reasons, or not being able to utilize it, but a lot of people get enough iron, and more importantly, too much iron is extremely toxic, and we're seeing more and more people today with iron toxicities. So let's look at some of the other factors. Now, if it's not just iron, then what else do we have to look at? We'll just look at the steps that have to work in order for the body to produce red blood cells and to utilize iron. So the first is bone marrow. The bone marrow is the origin for the blood cells. So the bone marrow has to be healthy, and there are a small number of genetic defects that where the bone marrow doesn't produce enough or the right kind of blood cells. touch on what to do if you have too much iron and the problems that could be associated with that as well as we go through this. Now, I want to run into this next very interesting area, which is why you might be deficient in the first place. And there's a lot of different reasons, but I just want to say that it's more common non-anemic iron deficiency than you have anemia. So it's very common that this iron did not affect the blood yet, but it affected a lot of other parts of your body. And we need iron for other things than just building hemoglobin. Iron is needed to build thyroid hormones. Iron is needed to make dopamine. Iron is also needed for nerve impulses to work correctly. That's why you would have arrhythmias if you were deficient. And so there's many different reasons why you need iron. But I will say though, I've talked to quite a few patients who unfortunately did not find a doctor that can evaluate deep enough, especially this iron problem. And the worst thing a doctor can do is tell you it's all in your head. That is the wrong diagnosis. People have these symptoms and you're told it's all in your head. Wow, talk about something that can really elevate your cortisol and piss you off. But I hear it all the time. So you really need to find a doctor that's a good evaluator that can dig deep and to help assess different levels of this problem. But I want to give you a lot of information to think with so you can sometimes even help your doctor guide them into a certain area, especially the reason why you're deficient in the first place. So number one is that you're not consuming enough iron from your diet. That can occur if you're a vegan or even a vegetarian, because the most available form of iron is the heme iron, okay? And that's in animal products like red meat, liver, seafood, etc. The type of iron you get from plants is non-heme, and that is not easily absorbed. In fact, you're going to absorb 10 times less iron from plants like spinach. But iron is also high in oxalates, which can block the absorption of iron. So let me go through the list. So number one, it can come from not consuming enough iron in your diet. Okay. Number two, having inflammation in the body. Inflammation in any part of your digestive system, whether it's in the stomach as gastritis or in the intestines, okay? Because if there's inflammation in those parts, your ability to absorb iron goes down significantly. All right, the next one would be stress. The more stress you have, the more trauma that you have. Surgeries, for example, which is a trauma, all these things can inhibit your ability to absorb iron. Also a loss of blood, whether you're bleeding or you donate blood or you have an ulcer, or let's say, for example, you have, some type of polyp in your colon that you're bleeding from and you're experiencing a loss of blood. Another common cause of low iron in your blood, especially if you're aging, is low stomach acids. Okay, if you don't have enough acid in your stomach, you're not going to absorb iron and other minerals, which is very, very common. It's called either hypochlorhydria or achlorhydria. And the way that you would know that you have low stomach acid is you have indigestion, gas, or even GERD, heartburn, or acid reflux, or even menstruation. Another reason why you might be deficient in iron is you had a gastric bypass surgery. Okay, that can cause a deficiency because you're having less digestive organs to absorb iron. Also, athletes or people who exercise a lot can be deficient in iron because some of the iron that you have is stored in the muscle, and as you use your muscle, you use up the iron, and that could be one reason as well. All right, next one is antacids. Any medication that suppresses acids could cause an iron deficiency because we need that hydrochloric acid in the stomach to be able to absorb iron. Fibroids, okay, if you have fibroids, that could be another reason why you're deficient in iron. Also, having a greater need for iron, like when you're pregnant or you're breastfeeding, or even a young child in the development needs and requires more iron. Also, people with eating disorders usually have an iron deficiency. Another thing that's very, very common as far as blocking iron is phytic acid. Now, that is in all the grains, the cereals, the bread, the pasta, the cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles. All of these grain carbohydrates have phytic acid, especially the whole grains, okay? So if you consume those foods, that could be the reason why you're deficient in iron. But phytic acid is also in legumes, beans, as well as, like I said, grains. Now there's another compound called tannins in tea and coffee that can block iron as well. So if you're drinking tea all day long and a lot of coffee, you could be low in iron. Chocolate has certain polyphenols, which are phytonutrients that can block iron. And of course, polyphenols are also in a lot of other things like turmeric, for example. So turmeric can actually lower your iron. Now, I'm not saying not to consume coffee or tea or turmeric, okay, or even chocolate. I'm just bringing up the awareness that that could contribute to a lessening amount of iron. But if you're consuming enough iron at the same time, you're going to be fine. Red wine, okay, red wine has polyphenols and even tannins that can block the absorption of iron. All right, another thing, polymorphism. What is that? That's something wrong with your genes. There's a mutation. You can get a DNA test. I got it done. I'm going to do a video on that because it's very fascinating. It's new information that can help you find your weaknesses within your genes so you can then do things about it. You know, there's all sorts of, it's called epigenetic lifestyle things you can do with the diet or taking more of a certain nutrient. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that I tested positive for this one called MTHFR, a slightly different one, which does affect iron. So I'm bringing it up because the genetic defect affecting this gene called MTHFR, it can cause you to have less iron, as well as a B12 deficiency and a folate deficiency. And as you may or may not know, if you're low in B12, you can also be anemic as well, a different type of anemia. And folate is very, very important in building red blood cells. The point is there are genetic weaknesses that go beyond just that gene that can affect your ability to absorb iron. And if you're trying to fix this problem with working on all these other things, and you don't know that there could be a genetic weakness, then you can go round and round and round. So the solution, if you have a mutation in your genes, is just to take more and see if that doesn't handle it. And sometimes people don't just take enough, or they don't take it long enough to see the changes, because sometimes it can take months to fix a severe deficiency. All right, another factor would be taking too much calcium or magnesium. Yeah, or drinking a lot of milk. Calcium, as well as magnesium, can inhibit iron. All right, so I just wanted to bring that up. Also, infections. When you have infection, your body will shut down the amount of iron available, because this iron is kind of a competition between the pathogens and your microbes. So your microbes know the pathogens can eat iron, and your microbes also can eat iron, so they will kind of hog the iron so the pathogen doesn't get it. And that can leave you in a situation where you have low iron. So if you even have a, let's say, a subclinical infection, whether it's Epstein-Barr virus or whatever, that could be why you're low in iron. And I already mentioned oxalates can block iron. So oxalates are in spinach, almonds, asparagus. Okay, so I gave you a long list of all the reasons why you might be deficient in iron. And then, of course, then you would correlate that with your blood test to be able to see what's going on. And as far as correcting an iron deficiency, I know people will take supplements, and they'll take elemental iron, they'll take different types, forms of iron. And I'm not saying that won't work, okay? But I always recommend trying to get your iron from food first. So start consuming more red meat, liver, shellfish, okay? And also try to identify why you're deficient in the first place. If it's low stomach acid, start taking apple cider vinegar or betaine hydrochloride to help with the pH. So you want to get to the root cause. And also, if you add vitamin C at the same time, like in a salad or sauerkraut, you increase the absorption of iron. Now, one thing you could take as pills is take liver pills. Or another product, there's actually spleen pills. You can get that dehydrated spleen extract. That seems to work really good as an iron supplement. Now, realize if you're very deficient, it could take weeks to correct this. All right, on the flip side, let's say you have a condition called hereditary hemochromatosis, okay? This is a situation where your body is absorbing too much iron. So you have too much iron, and this is the problem, okay? It can be very, very toxic. It can create problems with your liver, and your heart, and your brain, So based on a blood test, your doctor can determine if you have this problem, and now what do you do about it? Well, there's a couple things. I would recommend start consuming distilled water. I would get a machine to make your own. And so it's not in a plastic jug, but a glass jug coming from stainless steel, because distilled water can start to actually suck out some of the minerals. So just realize it'll pull out other minerals too, but you can then put the minerals back in that you want, but not the iron one, okay? Turmeric. Turmeric can act as a chelator, or something that binds that iron, and it can help pull it out of the body. Start consuming turmeric. Cocoa bean, that can help because that has a lot of polyphenols that can help bind iron. And definitely something like black tea would also help because it's higher in tannins, which can help bind the iron. So basically we want to take the things that are inhibiting iron if you're deficient and start taking those because you have too much. Now there's another thing you can take. I mentioned phytic acid, right? So you can actually take that as a supplement to help chelate iron or bind and remove iron from the body. And you can get that in a form called IP6. IP6, that's basically phytic acid. You start taking that to help bind the iron. And if it's really a problem and you want something stronger, you can take something called EDTA. That's a very powerful chelator. So just realize you have to put back in those minerals that your body really needs, and they're non-toxic, okay, minus the iron. All right, I gave you a lot of information about iron. I think the next most important thing for you to learn more about would be on how to improve the digestive system, simply because there are so many things that can go wrong in the digestive tract that can affect not just iron, but other nutrients. And I put that video up right here. Check it out.
I wanted to do this video about my hereditary hemochromatosis and iron overload issues that I dealt with, because this was part of the problem when I lost my voice for 8 years, and yeah, that really kind of sucked. And this was just only one of the problems. I had other factors that were contributing to that voice loss stuff, and I'll put the link in the description below this video for my video on how I lost my voice for 8 years if anybody wants to check that out. But I wanted to share this because this iron overload issue basically kills people all the time, but it's really hard to get diagnosed. Most doctors are going to miss this because there is no pharmaceutical solution for iron overload. You really have to kind of fix it with these kind of natural means that I'll explain in a minute. But I saw 23 different doctors and nobody caught it just because it's not really in their training. They kind of mention it in passing in their med school stuff, but it's not something that they're reminded of normally because there is no medication to fix it. So I had one out of these 23 doctors that looked at my blood work and was like, "Hey, do you eat a lot of spinach?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Okay, just don't." And he was confused about that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But that's pretty much the only note that any doctor ever gave me. And it turns out that my iron was incredibly high and creating a lot of problems. So I want to make this video just so that you can understand what to look out for and what to watch for. And because if this is an issue for you, it's going to create health issues, and you won't fix those health issues until you can fix this problem. Let's jump in.
T.C. Hill is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So there are a variety of issues that can make iron levels go too high, but with me, it appears I had something called hereditary hemochromatosis. And this is a genetic issue that makes your body absorb way too much iron. So I ended up doing this test. It was one of those online tests where they do the tests at local, kind of laboratories and such, but you don't really...
Well, hello, everyone. I am so honored to be here with my dear friend, Morley Robbins. You've been on the podcast a few times. It's been a while. It's been probably a year.
Yeah, I think it has been. Yeah.
And I know you. Morley's actually stayed at my house before, and when he says he does research every day, he's not kidding. 3 hours every morning. I've seen it with my own eyes, where he will find either some new piece of research or something that continues to enhance how he views the world of minerals especially around copper and iron dysregulation. So I am excited to dig in and to learn what the heck you've uncovered over the last year, because every time I see you, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to tell you about this. So tell us, like, what the heck's been going on over the last year, and what new pieces of information you discovered?
Just over the last year. Okay, that's no problem.
Yeah, it's like,
Wow.
no, what things stand out?
Well, first of all, happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
And very grateful to have you in my life, and vice versa. I think what's really increasingly coming to light is just how simple this whole issue is. And it's very unsettling for people to hear that, because it seems daunting and overwhelming. And again, I think there's this tug of war in the world of healing, that there's two schools of thought. There are thousands of reasons why we get sick, and then there's one reason why we get sick. And it seems to be more comforting for people to believe that there's thousands of reasons, as opposed to what, again, I think within the root cause protocol, we feel pretty strongly that there's this three-ring circus between copper and iron and oxygen. And it's this constant interplay between those three elements that set the stage for all sorts of symptoms, which get labels. Go to the Merck manual. There's 20,000 labels in there. And because we're human, we're very gullible, and we believe that there's 20,000 reasons why we get sick. When in fact, it's all one mechanism: lack of energy. You know it as well as I do. You see it in your practice. You see it in your business. And it's very disorienting to think that's it. That's the, what's it all about, Alfie? And it takes place all over the body, and that creates the illusion that it's some other mechanism. But it's, it isn't just that pathogens are in play. It isn't just that heavy metals are in play. It isn't just that toxins, endotoxins. It isn't just EMFs. It's like, what are they doing? What is that sea of external influence doing to destabilize the three-ring circus? It's always going to come back to that dynamic. And I think to really begin to pick at your question, what have I learned over the last year? This journey started 16 years ago with magnesium. That's where I got the nickname, the Magnesium Man. And then I started to look into, well, why is magnesium always being lost? What's the magnesium burn rate all about? And it's this torturous dynamic between iron and oxygen, and the oxidative stress, the rusting of tissue, and it affects magnesium because there's a lot of enzymes. They're called kinase enzymes that hold magnesium structurally, and when you're under stress, the body needs to find energy, so it cleaves off.
Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about the toxic effect from iron, which is in a lot of grains, which I know you're not eating, but you probably know people who do. So what they do with grains like breads, pasta, cereal, they fortify them in the United States, Canada, and Britain, and other countries, but not a lot of the European countries. But anyway, if you're getting exposed to too much iron, it could be a big problem for several reasons. Number one, iron is attracted to damaged tissue in the body. So if you have high levels of insulin, and you have inflammation, and you have insulin resistance, and you have problems with the heart, the brain, the kidneys, for example, the nervous system, well, iron goes into those areas and it oxidizes the tissues, which kind of rusts them out. It just rots them out. Just like in your car, you have this rust. So it oxidizes tissues, including the fat layer around the nervous system and the brain as well. So these metals accumulate without the ability to get rid of them. So the problem with excess iron is you can only get rid of like
I'm stressed.
What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the Strong Sisters YouTube channel. In today's video, we have the honor of having our friend Morley Robbins return to continue the iron overload discussion. The return of Morley Robbins. So if you haven't checked out the first video on iron overload, you're going to want to listen to that first, so I'll link it in the description below. Today, we addressed many of the questions that you guys left in the comment section, so thank you for those. And it was a full hour and 20-minute discussion just based on those questions. So we didn't actually get to our next topic at hand, which is magnesium, because Marley is the magnesium man. So that's coming, stay tuned. But for now, let's get back to iron and copper. Hope you guys enjoy. Hey Marley, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for returning. The first video on iron overload was a huge success, a huge favorite, I think, of our audience. Our dad actually called us this morning and said, wow, I love that video, guys. It was great. Morley was so great. So I think my dad had a lot of takeaways, and that's like hard because he doesn't really listen to many of our videos. So this one.
Wow, that's high praise.
Mm-hmm.
Give your dad a hug and a high five from me, okay?
Well, he does knuckle fives. He doesn't do the. He would give Morley a knuckle five.
Knuckle five, that's fine. Whatever.
So I think in this video, we're going to just wrap up some loose strings on the iron discussion and bring up a few other questions that people brought up in the last video, and then we'll eventually move on to magnesium, since you are a magnesium man. But yeah, is it okay if we just start with some of the iron questions that people had?
Sure.
Okay.
Just remember, in our next conversation, we're going to talk about the bake-off between the strong sisters.
Yes, we're going to be reviewing our blood tests and our hair and tissue mineral analysis and compare those two and compare to see who is more minerally deficient.
Or who's more minerally balanced.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So correct.
The last may not be first. We don't know. But the first may not be first either.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so correct me. I'm going to try to summarize the last video in like a sentence or two. Just due to just the modern era of like pollution and then just the food system just being so messed up, it's safe to say that we are all kind of overexposed to iron, and so we have an iron dysregulation problem in our body. And again, due to kind of the messed up food system, our soil is really depleted in copper, and so a lot of humans are like deficient in copper, and so those two things just exacerbate the problem, and so we're just very imbalanced with our iron and copper ratios.
In one sentence, that's impressed.
Well, we were so like that conversation really sparked some things in us, so we actually went to donate blood today.
Shiba.
I wonder what was going on. I was like, I don't remember those tattoos before.
Yeah. But we get there and they test your hemoglobin and your blood pressure. Yeah. My hemoglobin for the first test was 12.2, and they said, "Oh, that's too low."
정말.
And so I said, "Can you test again?" And so they tested, and I was 12.6, and so the cutoff is apparently 12.5. Well, can you remind us, like, what is the hemoglobin blood test? That's only one of 3 markers, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And how did they change the finger for the
Yeah,
test?
they tested middle finger on this hand and then middle finger on this hand. I'm not going to put that middle finger up, but
Okay. So
다들 너무 세져가지고
I'm right-handed, and they tested the right hand.
That's interesting. Okay. So yeah, 70% of the iron in the body is found in hemoglobin, and that's the waiter. We talked about that. Waiter carrying oxygen, and again, that's the biggest bulk of iron in the body. And that test was used exclusively from like 1860 to 1972. And then in the early 70s, a group of UK-based hematologists turned the spotlight to ferritin, just to thoroughly confuse everybody. And less than 10% of the body iron was found in ferritin, but ferritin's supposed to be inside the cell, not in the blood. And when it shows up in the blood, it's a problem. It means that there's pathology. And especially when it's high, it's usually liver pathology when ferritin goes high. So anything over 150 for a woman or 300 for a man would be considered high. And it can go into the thousands. I mean, there's some people who have conditions that I had 2 other clients who got iron invasions who did not have hemochromatosis before their iron invasions. And now they both have hemochromatosis, which is a sin. And what hemochromatosis does is, we're back to this hepcidin marker again. Hemochromatosis is a genetic alteration that downregulates the production of hepcidin. And what that allows is accumulation of iron in the tissue. And so people with hemochromatosis, very often they need to do weekly phlebotomies. They have so much iron accumulating in their system. There's different variations. There's 2 classical forms of hemochromatosis, but there are probably a handful of variants. But hemochromatosis is more prevalent in Northern European, people of Northern European descent. People from Ireland have a lot of hemochromatosis, very common.
I found out I had hemochromatosis really by chance. My mum is a nurse and she was participating in a study that they were doing at the hospital that she worked at the time. And as a result of that study, it came out that her children should be tested. So my brother and I were tested, and that's how I found out I had it. So I wasn't symptomatic at that point in time. So it was interesting. I was in my early 20s. I was really young, so very fortunate really to have found out so early and be able to integrate it.
And let's talk about iron briefly. We mentioned iron is a complex. We'll have to do a whole separate podcast on iron. And I've talked about iron somewhat because I got interested in my iron status in the past. I wonder, after listening to your stuff, I wonder if a lifetime of copper deficiency, or perhaps I just have a genetic predisposition to overly absorbing iron. Obviously, there's a lot of iron in my diet. I eat a lot of meat and organs.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But my ferritin was at times over 300. So I did start doing phlebotomy. And now my ferritin is much lower. I think it's 70 or 60 now. And there are definitely ways to do phlebotomy, but it was interesting thinking like, how do I, maybe get rid of, is this a lifetime of over avid consumption of iron and not enough copper elevating the ferritin light chain as we saw, or what? But I did phlebotomy, and it's interesting that it's lowered that. And then, so the labs that I looked at, and again, this is quite complex for people, were the ferritin, the serum iron, the transferrin saturation,
Right.
and then I'm trying to think if there's anything else. What do you look at for iron? You look at ferritin,